All right, SS-8H5, Georgia and the Civil War. Questions discuss: what is a civil war? It's a war fought between two sides in the same country. Who fought in the American Civil War? The Union, the North, and the Confederacy in the South. Antebellum is the time before the war. Here we have these bright blue states are our northern states, our Union, our free states, and here in the grayish blue, that is the southern states, the Confederacy. Okay. So, slavery in the South. Slaves were considered property. They had few rights to no rights, and they normally spent their entire life in slavery. King cotton and tobacco are the major crops that led to slavery because of the sheer numbers of people that were needed to plant, harvest, and grow these crops. The life of a slave was not a good one. Their families were separated. Husbands and wives were separated. Children were taken from their parents. They lived in poorly built one-room homes, such as this. Their diets varied by what their owner would provide for them. They often worked sun up to sundown the entire day. They had one set of clothes until they literally fell apart, and they went barefoot. They did sing spiritual songs to give themselves comfort and also directions for escape if they were able to get hooked into the Underground Railroad. There were slave rebellions such as Nat Turner's. These lead to fugitive slave law. They were no longer allowed to learn to read and write. White people believed that if slaves were not able to read and write, they could not communicate to have such rebellions. It also led to things such as the slave codes, which took away nearly all the rights of slaves by regulating their actions, telling them they couldn't carry weapons or come into contact with white people, marry them, or testify against them in courts. The Underground Railroad is not an actual railroad. It is a network of people working together with houses, river crossings, boats, wagons, roads, all sorts of places that provide a trail of flight from the southern slave states up into northern free states. Harriet Tubman was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She was known as Moses because she led more than 300 slaves out of bondage into freedom. All right. North versus the South. As far as economy, the North focused on business, factories, and manufacturing because they didn't have the soil and the ability to grow like they did in the South, where they focus on the agriculture and at this point predominantly cotton because it's growing so well. And now that the cotton gin has been invented and removing the seeds has become so easy, they are able to grow and process more and more and more. All right, states' rights. It believes that the state's interest should take priority over the interest of the national government. So the state of Georgia knows what's good for it, and it should be more important than what the national government says. Up north, they wanted to function as one. They believed decisions should be made to benefit the whole country, north and south, and everyone should obey that law. In the South, they believed in states' rights. They felt the states knew themselves best, and the North didn't know or did not care or understand the South. Tariffs are a tax on imported goods. The North wants high tariffs because they want Americans to buy products that they've made instead of stuff from other countries, whereas the South wants low tariffs because they like to buy stuff from European countries. Nullification. That is the act of declaring something invalid, saying it never existed, basically. When in 1832, South Carolina threatens to secede for the first time from the Union because of tariffs placed on imported goods. Clearly, the South did not like that. They believed that as a state's right, they should be able to nullify tax from the federal governments. Right. The Compromise of 1850. A few states want to come in, or I should say a few territories want to become states, but at this point the states are evenly split in the Senate between North free states and southern slave states. They both want to keep it even, but so they come up with a compromise. Remember, that's meeting in the middle. Everybody gets a little bit of what they want. So for the North, it was California coming in as a free state. That was what they wanted. And for the South, it was the fugitive slave law. Compromise of 1850, California free state, fugitive slave law. All right, the Georgia Platform was designed to support the Compromise of 1850. as long as the fugitive slave law is enforced and the North stops trying to ban slavery, or else they're going to secede. Alexander Stephens is a big player in Georgia. He wants to stay as one country. He is against secession, so he supports the Compromise of 1850. Dred Scott, he was a slave who traveled to free states with his master. When his master dies, he sues for his freedom. However, the Supreme Court rules that he is property. He could not sue because he was not a citizen, and the court cannot take away a slave owner's property. All right, presidential election of 1860. From the North, we have the Republican Party with high tariffs, free states, their candidate Abraham Lincoln. In the South, Democratic Party, they want the low tariffs. They support the slave states, and their candidate is John Breckinridge. However, we know that there are actually 4 candidates in this election. You can see. Despite John Breckinridge winning the majority of the southern states, you know that Lincoln won the election. He was our 16th president. He did not receive many popular votes, but he won the majority of electoral college votes from free states. He received 0 electoral college votes from the southern states. They did not trust him. They were very anxious about him. Because of this, they decide that they will secede from the Union to protect their rights. The first state to do so is South Carolina. And Georgia meets. They debate about seceding or staying as part of the Union, focusing on states' rights and federal governments. They vote in January of 1861 to secede, to leave the Union. Okay? So these states that all secede form the Confederate States of America. So our differences: North, free, abolitionists, they're against slavery. Industry is important up there. They believe in national rights versus states' rights, and high tariffs. South, slave states, slave owners, agriculture, they do like states' rights and low tariffs, and they're Democrats. Alright, so we have the Civil War. 1861 to 1865, 620,000 Americans die, thousands of battles, but frees 3 million slaves. Here's our different states. Remember, we have the Confederacy, the Union, and then these border states that still keep their slaves, but they do not secede. They stay as part of the Union. Alright. You guys know this by now. The North has the initial advantage because they have more industry, more railroads, and more soldiers. Okay? There they are. Got the North, the United States of America, the Confederate States of America, the condensed timeline of events. We have the start of the Civil War, the Battle of Antietam, which is the bloodiest one-day battle of the war, and also prompts Lincoln to write the Emancipation Proclamation. Then Gettysburg, which is the turning point of the war. Chickamauga, the first battle in Georgia. The Battle of Atlanta, which leads to Sherman's march to the sea, and the eventual surrender. Okay. Fort Sumter, first shots. Union blockades. This is a strategy used by the Union to keep the Confederate from importing and exporting goods. They set up their ships around the southern coastlines to keep them from going. Now there are blockade runners that are able to sneak by them and are very profitable because of this, because it's dangerous, a lot of risk, so they make a lot of money. Antietam. Confederacies trying to capture Washington, D.C. They are not successful. It leads to the bloodiest battle, one-day battle of the Civil War. Also leads to the Emancipation Proclamation. He asked the South to surrender, and he will let them keep them slaves. They're slaves. But if they did not surrender, he was going to free all of them. It did not apply to those border states that stayed in the Union. But because the Confederacy does not surrender, their slaves are freed in 1863. Next, we have the Battle of Chickamauga, September of 1863. This is a little bit later in that year. This is the largest battle in Georgia and the first one that's fought for 3 days. It is a Confederate victory. They were trying to keep the Union forces away from Atlanta. Problem was, after they won, they didn't follow up their retreat, and they allowed the Union to go back to Chattanooga to regroup, and now they come back to Georgia led by General William T. Sherman. Alright, and he starts with his Atlanta campaign. All these battles up through here, all these black marks, they are different battles on the way down to Atlanta. From Chickamauga to Atlanta, the Southerners are trying to stay on the defense, but he keeps just marching around them and marching around them. Alright, so he fights for Atlanta for over a month, and they encircle the city. They take control in late August and stay for a few months. His strategy, we know, is to cut off Georgia's support for the war effort. So the first thing he does is burn Atlanta to the ground. If there's nothing there, if there's no industry, if there's nothing stored there, they cannot help him. They cannot support the war effort anymore. Alright, then he starts his march to the sea. It's a path of destruction from Atlanta to Savannah, 60 miles wide and 300 miles long. He eventually captures Savannah. The representatives down there come out and meet him and offer to surrender Savannah to him so that he doesn't destroy the city. Right? These are the different troops, the different regiments, and the ways that they went. On the way, you can see they destroyed the railroad tracks. This was one way to stop the Confederacy. If they can't ship things, if they don't have railroads, they're kind of pointless. Andersonville, worst prisoner of war camp in the South during the Civil War. Very unsanitary conditions. The head of the prison is even executed because of his cruelty. Over 18,000 men died. Remember, we talked about there's one creek here. This prison was designed for 10,000 men. They had 30,000 crammed in there. They're supposed to drink the water up here, bathe in it here, and go to the bathroom down here. Problem is, it starts backing up with that many men going to the bathroom, and bacteria comes all the way up here, so now they're getting sick. They're starving. Not a good thing. Eventually, Lee and the Confederacy surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, and the war is over. It cost $6 billion for the North and $4 billion for the South. 620,000 soldiers died, and they're all Americans because everybody in the war was American. Fortunately, the U.S. would never see conflict like this again on its territory.